Tonight on Roundtable.
I went to the grocery store and bought a 15-pound bag of rice because it was on sale for a really good price. And I'm like, now I won't starve for a while.
Jody Houser, Eisner-nominated writer of Faith.
This wasn't me sort of rolling up my sleeves and deciding to do a little empire building. This was me sort of understanding this was the only way this can be done.
Spike Trotman, independent publisher and creator of Templar, Arizona.
Year after year, generation after generation, we have people who are just trying to create something that's just yearning to be something else.
Scott McCloud, writer of Understanding Comics.
Everyone, whether they like it or not, when they get into an industry, they are a product of how that industry was when they were just starting out. It's so good to see you again. I haven't seen you in, I don't know if you know this or not, but Scott was one of the first people who gave a crap about me and anything I did. This was back in post Understanding Comics, a few years after Understanding Comics, because you had black hair then. And yeah, low blow. You had black hair then, but we were at a Comic-Con and I recognized you. And you came over and you said my name before I could say yours.
Aww.
And I immediately had this step on me moment where it's I couldn't understand that I was being acknowledged by someone I held in such high esteem. And it was that moment that kind of was the exception to the rule. Everyone says don't meet your heroes. But you were actually kind of everything I hoped you would be, and you were really fucking cool about everything.
Oh, wow. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Well, I only just met Scott outside before we came in here, but you did know my name too. So.
Yeah, he's
so
that.
Clearly, this is a pattern for you, knowing who people are
that
and making them feel like they belong here.
Yeah, way to make me speechless at the beginning of this. I don't know what to say now.
It's weird because comics is in this place where let's make some enemies, shall we? Comics is in this place where it's the old guard is feeling super defensive because things as they've always been are suddenly no longer applicable. There is a way they're used to comics working and a way they were used to comics sort of being presented to the public that is no longer the case. And that defensiveness sometimes comes out in abuse for people who are coming up. When I was coming up in webcomics, this is turn of the century. This is going to feel completely alien.
Well, you mean literally turn of the century?
Literally, turn of the century.
It's not an expression.
Back in 1901.
When I was your age. In 2000, 2002, 3, 4, that period was really experimental, and it was really, I really envy the kids these days who are in their 20s and just leaving high school, just leaving college, and they're like, oh, I want to make a comic. They have a roadmap. They can be like, okay, well, I'll put the comic on Tumblr, and then after 2 or 3 years, and I have fans and updating, then I'll kickstart it, and then I'll go to one of the 15,000 conventions, and that's where I'll get my start, and that's how it'll go. And when I was coming out, it was 5, 6 years after Marvel declared bankruptcy, and those jokes about comics dying were very real, haha.
I mean, you still hear that all the time, but it's I actually just made this joke yesterday. Comics dying is essentially Paul Rubens' character in the Buffy the Vampire Slayer movie, where it takes him 30 minutes to die, and he's just kick the wall. It's if comics is actually dying, which I think is just sort of like you're saying, changing.
Yeah, exactly.
It is
the comics I'm familiar with is dying. Is what
it's a
saying.
phoenix that will be reborn because comics at the heart of it is a storytelling medium. That's something that can't die unless people stop pairing words with pictures.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you don't kill an art form. And Will Eisner used to talk about all the different times that comics had died. And he goes way back before me. Here's a guy who was trading stories with Rube Goldberg in 1923 or whatever. And he just said, comics would die, and then comics would die, and comics would die. And they just kept dying. He knew they'd always come back because you can't kill an art form. You can't kill an idea.
Especially not one where you need one person to make it.
Yeah, right.
It's one of the things I love about comics is you can make it on your own, alone in a room. Arguably you can do that with a lot of other mediums, but filmmaking has always struck me as so many moving parts involved in just making one movie.
It's a behemoth.
Yeah, whereas comics is, you and a piece of paper and a pencil, and how do you kill a piece of paper and a pencil?
Well, I mean, there are many ways you can do that, none of which are legal. So we probably shouldn't talk about that here.
Yeah, but on the conceptual level.
Yeah, on the conceptual level.
But for any cartoonist, especially one who's like writing, drawing, everything, like all of a sudden at some point or another, all three of us have done that at some point or another. Like you can watch a movie and you can watch literally 1,000 names. Like scroll, and
not counting the production babies.
Not counting all those production babies, and you can just say to yourself, that if that was me, it would just be one name.
Yeah, exactly.
I am that. I am all of those names. I contain multitudes.
We are the joke in like when you see the Saturday Night Live bit or the whatever bit where it's all like catering by Bill, script by Bill, executive produced by Bill. It's like that's us.
But that changed me seeing that. That was a very important thing to see. Oh, I could do it all.
And until very, very recently, no one gave a crap about comics, and everyone was kind of just waiting for us to die.
Which is a gift.
Yeah, which is a gift, honestly.
And I'm actually cool with people who like want to develop a property in comics, but you have to have the respect for the medium there. Yeah. I got my start doing webcomics, and I initially was looking for an artist because I'm just not that good at drawing, and I couldn't find one, so I did go ahead and do it myself, and I did about probably 9 years total worth of webcomics. But they were limited to strip comics because I would draw something once and then reuse the same art,
Very
but at least you had a few different
over
templates, right? It wasn't quite like dinosaur comics.
Well, I had a cupcake, and I drew one cupcake, and I photoshopped I think 4 different characters out of it because you can have different flavor cupcakes and they have different personalities. But it was actually a really interesting writing experience because I was like, well, I want to do this big crazy thing, and it's like, no, my art skills will not allow me to do that big crazy thing. So working within your limitations is actually a really good skill set to develop.
But how do you think that affected you as a writer, having started out where even though you're reusing the visuals, they're still your visuals, and you're still creating it from scratch? Do you think that changed you as a writer when you were writing for other people later on?
I mean, a little bit. I think when I started doing collaborative work in comics, I was pulling more initially from my screenwriting background because that's what I went to school for. And I actually had to learn, no, you can actually have a lot more influence in writing a comic script than a screenplay, because I remember, my screenwriting professor going through with the red pen going like, that's not your choice, that's the casting director, that's the set designer, all that stuff. But I mean, it was a good lesson for that specific industry. But, when I started in comics and I'm actually working with people who can really draw, which is super exciting. Yeah. And I'm getting all these questions like, what does this thing look like? What, like, give me some more details here. And it's like, oh, I'm allowed to do that now. That's exciting that I tried writing.
The thing that really bugs me is the assumption. Like, I have friends who have optioned comics for film, and like my reaction is internet high five when that happens. Like, awesome, cool. Sure, now you can, get a new car or something. That's great.
Well, you can afford to do your next
book. Or you can keep drawing. Yeah, that's the way I always look at it.
And it's like, I am always going to be down for creators profiting from their IP, like 1,000%. It's the assumption that comics is a waiting room for another industry that really gets up my ass.
Well,
I can't deal with that.
There are broader implications for this. I see this in the whole media landscape. I see people working in art forms where they're not looking to the core qualities of that medium. They're somehow looking outside of it. They're seeing it as a poor man's version of something else. Happens in video games too, with the idea of like trying to create something that feels like a motion picture. Instead, like I know it when I visited
walking simulator.
Yeah, right. Yeah, when I visited Blizzard, and they had this like big orc or something, and they had this little sundial that he was on, and True North was gameplay first, because that's the core of the medium, right? And for us, the core of the medium is sequence. It's that row of static images, and trying to find a story that can only be told in that medium. Yeah. And we've year after year, generation after generation, we have people who are just trying to create something that's just yearning to be something else.
Yes, and it's so obvious sometimes.
Yeah.
I only just went freelance full-time 13 months ago.
Fancy.
So I was still working with my day job until I managed to land 2 ongoing books, because that was sort of enough, steady income that I could
put on your hat and take your hobo bindle and I'll try my luck.
Exactly.
So what was it like? Because I remember for me, what was it like the first time you woke up in the morning and you realized, this is it. I am like, I'm going to get up, I'm going to do this thing, and this is now my job.
I think it was mostly, oh God, what have I done?
That's the spirit.
So were you scared?
Actually, I was the best way to illustrate my sense of, like, after I gave notice at my job, even before I left my job, I went to the grocery store and bought a 15-pound bag of rice because it was on sale for a really good price. And like, now I won't starve for a while.
That's
like,
good.
Yeah. And I've always been sort of super overly cautious with stuff. So I had the savings built up. I probably could have left earlier, but I had really good health insurance at my day job.
Yeah.
But I was
You are not the first person to say something like that to me.
Yeah, but I was at the point, it was a 9-hour day job, and I was trying to put in as close to equal time as I could on the comics. And it's like, you can't work 18-hour days for an extended length of time. That would kill you.
Are you sure? I swear I did.
Well, I was at the level where I'm like, I'm going to kill myself to keep health insurance, and that's sort of really counterintuitive, you know.
Yeah.
When I was living alone my very first year, I was working 18 hours a day for like a week, and then I went 3 straight days without sleeping at all. And I vividly remember I was beginning to hallucinate that like my teeth were falling out when I would look at myself in the mirror and everything.
Oh my God.
And it was funny too, because I was actually drawing a kind of a psychotic breakdown. That particular part of that.
It was just method writing. That's all it was.
Yeah. But yeah, I couldn't. I pushed it as far as I could. It's good though to push. Do you ever really push yourself?
I've never pulled an all-nighter in my life.
Really?
I was like, if I got through grad school taking 150% class load most of the time and did not pull an all-nighter, I will never do it.
Somebody needs to do a 24-hour comic.
The sleep deprivation angle with me, when I start getting really sleep deprived, that's when I start laughing maniacally.
I actually kind of like the nose to the grindstone thing. Like for me, the grindstone just smells really good. Like I kind of love the ritual of coming into work at the same time every morning and knowing that I'm gonna be at it for that whole long stretch of time.
I've definitely gone with very little sleep, but I always, and especially writing-wise, I'm like, if it gets to the point when I'm misspelling every single word, I'm like, I at least need to take 2 or 3 hours of sleep, and I'll get back to it. Like, I'll wake up early and finish this. But
I have a question for the table. Like, would you say where you are in comics right now is a place where you feel established?
That's weird because yes and no.
Okay.
I mean, I feel like I've pretty well established myself, but it's really only been 2 years, just slightly over 2 years since my first book came out.
Wow, okay.
So I'm kind of like, I think I'm established, but how the hell did I get here? Like, it was just kind of like.
Yeah. How about you?
Yeah, but with me it's a problem, because I'm established enough now that I'm kind of like,
man.
I've ripened and now I'm rotting a little bit. And I'm like, I'm sort of like just passing on the other side of that line where it's like, I know how this goes. Yeah. I know I'm at that point where it's just, I think right after the election, everything kind of shook a little. Yeah. And I think a lot of things that had just been kind of sitting on the tree, but maybe were a little they shook loose a bit.
Yeah.
And I felt like, I can see myself passing into the past as being, like sort of attached to the past. And I know that it happens to almost everyone, but I knew just a few people like Will Eisner that somehow managed to like avert catastrophe and not become that old guy who just is completely disconnected. Yeah. But I have to do a lot of work. So the answer is yes, but it's not necessarily a good thing.
It's nice where I am now. I'm not going to sit here and bullshit. I like where I am and what I'm doing. I'm dissatisfied, but I'm an ambitious person, so I will die dissatisfied. But at the same time, I think it's kind of vital that I keep talking about the reason I do what I do is that if I did it sort of the classic way, and this isn't just a combination of like my personal thing, like what I'm interested in and not interested in. It's also a combination of the demographics of comics when I was just getting into it and the state of the industry overall and its general health, which could be accurately described when I was getting into it. If I had done it sort of the classic route, if I had submitted my proposals to publishers and if I had, gone to portfolio reviews and tried to get writing gigs, trying to get all kinds of, basic comic gigs the way people back then told me I should be doing it as opposed to putting it on the internet by myself, I would have quit comics 10 years ago completely defeated.
Yeah.
And that's sort of a reality that I kind of feel the need to communicate to people. It's like everyone, whether they like it or not, when they get into an industry, they are a product of how that industry was when they were just starting out. And at this point, I was really getting into it late 90s, and it was not in a good place. And you would go to a con, and sometimes I would be the only black woman in the building, and it's something that was commented on. And I had family telling me, I don't know how to say this, but look at people who make comics and look at you, and how far do you honestly think you're going to get? And,
see, but that question's a challenge.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's kind of how I approached it. It's like I kind of understood the paths that you kind of went down, because those are the paths you went down, period, were not going to work for me on sort of an implicit level that I think before the election, a lot more people have been like, oh, come on. But nowadays, maybe they're more willing to sort of, oh, I could see how that might be a problem. So everything that I made kind of necessity is the mother of invention. Everything I made kind of needed to be made if I wanted to get where I was going. Yeah. And it's nice that I've managed to make it, and it's nice that the internet exists, like couldn't exist without the internet. So I have access to people directly, as opposed to needing some kind of editorial approval or the promotions department of a larger publisher that wouldn't want to take a gamble on me anyway. But at the same time, this wasn't me sort of rolling up my sleeves and deciding to do a little empire building. This was me sort of understanding this was the only way this can be done.
There have been so many new voices coming in, telling so many different types of stories, that I think a lot of those stereotypes are starting to get broken down.
Well, they have no choice now, because the demographics of the comic readership are changing too.
Yeah.
So it's like the justification, I can't see an 18 to 39-year-old white cis male enjoying this story, no longer exists.
And I know a lot of guys who are just like, like very much in the core demographic who want those type of stories.
Exactly.
And and I think it's really insulting to say like, no, they will only read about people exactly like them. It's like you're not only just, marginalizing whole groups of society, you're insulting your main readership.
Exactly.
And saying that like, oh, they don't want to read about women. And meanwhile, these guys are like, I'll totally read about women if it's a good story and a cool character. Like, it's weird. It's like bizarre. It hurts both sides.
And it's sort of in denial about what sort of what caused the major sort of almost seismological shift in comics readership to begin with, which was a ton of women crashing into comics like a tidal wave.
Like the Kool-Aid man.
The manga wave.
The manga wave was
women were like
important.
Yeah, women were the Kool-Aid man coming through the wall going, manga! Like that's what happened. Like Tokyo Pop showed up and they got their...
I remember when they were mixed zine.
Was it like a Barnes & Noble deal they had or something, where they basically got a ton of shelf space and they began sort of mass translating Fruits Basket and Sailor Moon.
And when was it? It was in the 90s, right? Early 90s?
Early 90s.
What else happened in the early 90s?
Other than Marvel going bankrupt?
The first graphical web browser.
Oh.
And so you had this convergence. You had at the same time, the exact same time, all these girls are discovering manga and sitting in Barnes & Noble reading it, and they're all able to talk to each other. And now all of a sudden, all of these barriers that had kept every genre but one, and every demographic but one as the dominant one, all of a sudden things could come in through the side door, and somebody could just on their own start putting up stuff on the web that didn't look like what was on the market, and people could find it. And all the barriers, it fell apart. All of the things that had kept that penned in that little tiny superhero sweaty that locker, it just fell apart all at once.
They were sort of just walking around the gatekeepers.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
to this day they continue. It's bizarre when people sort of still treat their interest, like comics especially, like a special club that you need their permission to be into.
Yeah. It's like they forged their whole identity around it, and anything that sort of violates what their view of comics is, it's like it's personally, they're seeing it as a personal attack.
Back in the 80s, there was this movement, like about 86, 87, Watchmen come out, Dark Knight came out, and we were like getting out the word, hey, comics aren't just for kids anymore. I was part of that, like all of these people were saying comics aren't just for kids anymore, and then about 10 years later, we woke up one day and realized no kids were reading comics.
Yeah.
We're like, wait! We've made a terrible mistake.
Exactly.
Like we're from Job from Arrested Development. I've made a terrible mistake. And then, but again, there's that hockey stick thing. Is that along comes like Jeff Smith and Raina and a few other people. Scholastic gives, just tries out some stuff. They do a Babysitter's Club. It seems to do well. Maybe we could try this little thing, Smile, that Raina has on the side. But then again, once again, you see that gradual growth, and then that gradual growth explodes because there was all that potential energy.
And those kids who are reading, Smile and Drama and Bone and Amulet, and Jellaby and like all the other comics that are out there that are like specifically for children, they're going to get older, and a significant portion of them are going to want to keep reading comics, and maybe a fraction of those kids are going to make comics. And so there is now a life cycle. There is now a source of new blood that's like a faucet. It's steady and it's constant. And so I only see good things for comics. I only see more interest. I only see a bigger audience and more creators and more variety.
More ways in.
Kind of like how nowadays a lot of my friends are in their late 20s, and as a result, there sure are a lot of like magical girl comics that are out there right now.
Because it's everyone who got their start reading manga and watching anime.
Yeah, they were reading Sailor Moon, they were watching the Sailor Moon cartoon, and then they grew up and that sort of digested and it got remade and it got other influences. And then when they became creators, kind of almost at the same time, suddenly there were 5, 6, 7 magical girl strips that I knew of. So who knows how many there are out there that I never saw. And it's just like that sort of direct line of descent. In 10 years, it's going to be based on Reina's books, and that's going to be fascinating.
And a lot of people were bad-mouthing manga, like in the early years. A lot of people were like, "Oh,
like
there's
not
this
real
invasion.
comics.
It's not real
Yeah.
comics."
I can't wait for this manga fad to be over
drove me nuts
with.
because I thought we had a lot. I thought that we had a lot to learn from Japanese comics in
Absolutely.
1982.
Yeah, like the dismissing of manga again. That was like I talked about this before. It was this utterly sort of not thinking lizard hindbrain defensive maneuver. It's like no, comics is this, and comics will always be this because this is what I'm used to. This is what it was when I was 13, and I'm 35 now, and I'll be damned if it changes. But like the most important thing that people who maybe are into like the older school of comics need to understand is comics don't belong to you. Yeah. They have never just belonged to you. And you do not exercise control over other what people make and other people care about. And you cannot gatekeep comics because you will be walked around and ignored.
And I mean, the thing is, like, it hurts the industry. And I say this as someone who writes like cape and superhero books. You know, the fact that the mass market only really knows about superhero books and they think that's the entirety of the comics industry, you know, it keeps new readers from coming in because they don't know that there's books out by other publishers and by indie creators that would really appeal to them and stuff that they'd like. They'd be like, I don't, you know, either the superhero stuff is like not really my thing or it's too complicated.
I was like 18 or 19 and I had a friend, this will also date me horribly, I had a friend who at the time was very, very into Gaiman's Endless and especially Death. And to the point where she had a pull box at the comic shop. And we were going somewhere and she was just like, I need to get my pull box before we go. And I was like, okay, whatever.
So like, what does that even mean?
Yeah, exactly. So we go to the comic shop and I was just wandering around while they got her box for her. And I saw a comic on a rack that was called Fun with Milk and Cheese. And I read it and I started laughing out loud in the comic shop, and it's like laugh rule. If you laugh, you have to buy it.
Yep.
So I bought it, and like books like that are what sort of woke me up to the fact that comics can be fun and irreverent and dirty, and now my eyes are open.
But now we may have a generation of kids who are starting out understanding that a little better, because if they start with Reina, or if they even start with like Baby Mouse or something like that, or even Toon books, right? They're starting when they're 4 years old, and then they're coming up and they're already seeing some of the variety that comics has to offer. And by the time they arrive at that stage, the Excalibur stage, right? They've already seen a lot of different things that comics can do. So it's just natural. It's like, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe there's something else that is.
Yeah, and like back then, it was just, it's this or nothing. Yeah. Like it was a spinner rack in Walden books.
Yeah, if you like hear music you don't like as a kid, you don't think, well, I guess music's not for me.
Like if I was a guy, I would be the most stereotypical comic book reader because you know it's like I started as a teenager. I read only superhero books for years, but you know manga was part of it. But seeing like so many other things, it was like. It was a revelation. I still love superhero books. I still write superhero books, but you know, I want to write so much more.
So, you guys heard about the Marvel thing, right?
Yeah, I was just I'm not as intimately aware of it because I'm not reading those books regularly. But
me neither. It's just since I'm in comics, I'm kind of forced to be aware of stuff like this.
And it's frustrating because I'm working with Marvel right now, and I'm primarily working with editors who are women and people of color, and I'm like, I know that's not representative of the people who are actually putting the books out. So it's frustrating. It's really frustrating.
Here's the thing.
Well, why don't you recap?
Okay.
So it's just for anyone who doesn't know about it.
And correct me if I get any of the details wrong, because again, it's like I am literally forced to be aware of this simply because of the industry I'm in. I'm not hunting this down. It's just in my Twitter timeline. I can't not see it. but Marvel recently canceled a bunch of titles, like their monthly titles, and it was a bunch of their newer monthly titles. And when questioned why, one of the vice presidents, I think, of Marvel,
it was at a retailer summit.
At a retailer summit, said something along the lines, well, no one wants these comics, and the reason that they're failing is they're too diverse and they have too many brown people and too many women in them, and readers don't want that. And my first reaction to that was actually, fucking told you they'd do this. Because for real, I remember much earlier on when I was still going to San Diego Comic-Con, so you know it was a while ago, and I think it was the Minx line was being announced.
Oh, yeah.
It was going to be launched. And for folks who are not Jurassic, the Minx line was sort of, was it DC or Marvel's attempt?
It was DC. It was Shelley Bond who was behind it.
DC's attempt at, like, we make comics for girls now. And they had a lot of sort of top flight talent on it. And I saw the announcement for it, and I heard sort of the initial publicity push for it. And I remember thinking to myself, okay, so they're going to do this, and then it's not going to work, and then they're going to say, this gives them sort of 10 more years to say, we tried that, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So whenever anyone asks them about that, they can be like, look, we tried that, it doesn't work, girls don't read comics.
Yeah, but you know what? You can cancel a book, but you can't unpublish it. You can't take it back out of the timeline. And the ones who read that material, and the ones who, like we were saying with the licensed books, right? You never know which book is going to be somebody's first book. Somebody is still going to discover that stuff. Maybe they'll discover it in a back issue bin in a few years, and it's going to put an idea in their head that's not going to go away, that you cannot kill.
Yeah.
And that energy now has a place to go, because any idea, any kind of character, any kind of story can still be made, whether Marvel or DC or Dark Horse or IDW does it or not.
Yeah.
It can still be made, and it is being made. And you may find a lot of those stories, if they don't go to the mainstream, they're just going to have to go somewhere else.
And I mean,
they will be made.
The editors who worked on those books and the creators who worked on those books, they're still there. They're still making comics.
Yeah, you don't cancel the writer or the artist either. They still are alive and walking the earth. They can still make stuff.
And those people are still at those publishers.
And for all the talk of girls don't read comics, and that's why Minx didn't work. Well, like, motherfucker, I'm sorry, but you're completely wrong. And I have friends who can lovingly recount squatting in the hall of a Barnes & Noble while mom is shopping, speed reading Fruits Basket because they could not afford 15 books. And that is like the quintessential young creator's story now.
Right.
And a lot of those creators are women. So no, it's not that women don't read comics, fucker. It's women don't read your comics, and that's a problem for you to figure out.
And the weird thing is, like, growing up, you know, the only people I knew who read superhero comics were girls. It was me and my friends in middle school having fights in the hallway over X-Men trading cards, like, that almost got really bloody. Yeah. And, you know, and
you just admit to it.
Oh yeah, no, I've told this story many a times, and I'm proud because I won that trade without actually drawing blood. There were threats of drawing blood, but no blood was drawn.
Nice.
But the thing was, like, at that point, if you told me, like, boys don't read superhero comics, I might have believed it because I didn't know any boys who did. I just knew a lot of girls who did.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's so many, you know, I think one of the things we've addressed here really well today is there's just such a wide range of comics and comics delivery systems out there now. It's like, find the people.
And Patreon, oh my God.
Find the people who are doing the things that is the closest to the way you want to do it. Like, if you want to do, like, cool indie self-published stuff, don't necessarily go talk to the guy who's been doing superhero comics for 30 years, because his advice is
stale.
Well, and it might be relevant for a very certain aspect of the industry, but that might not be what you're trying to do.
Yeah, there is no one way to make comics now. I know people who have, you know, never been legit and published or whatever, and they make their entire living directly from fans. They never put out books, nothing like that. Entirely from fans, entirely Patreon. That's one way to do it. There are people who publish and do the con circuit. That's another way to do it. There are people who do licensed book scripting or art or, you know, whatever, just in general, work for hire. That's another way to do it. And that's awesome because more variety means more ways to make a living and more ways to make it work. There's no one way, and that's great.
I have friends who do consignments with comic shops for their self-published books, and they might not necessarily go to a lot of cons, but that's still a way to get their work out there.
Right on.
Well, 20 years ago, the top 10 people, the top most successful people in comics, were all successful in the same way.
Yeah.
And now the top 10 most successful people in comics
well, 1
are
through
all
9 are
successful
Raina.
not counting Raina. But they're all successful in different ways.
Yeah, and that's
it's
exciting.
completely
That's a good
changed.
place to be. And it's not perfect now, but it's so much better than it used to be.
It is much better.